Since we have already created the explore page and we can see other users in our app, what we can do now is actually implement the follow following functionality. So before we start to implement that functionality, I just wanted to have a talk about how we can go about adding followers and following. So the simplest idea I found is that, see, for every user, similarly, they have a collection, a sub collection of posts. They can have two more sub collections. One would be followers and one would be following. What happens is that each follower document will contain a user in a similar manner. Basically, we'll store an entire user in another user's following or followers collection. So let's just think about, suppose if I am the user signed in as gone here and I go to the explore page, I go to this other user, and now I click on follow for this user. So there is one thing that we need to do is that create a sub collection here which would be named following, and inside of following there would be a new document added which would be this user Crollo. Other than that, we need to do one more thing. Basically, we need to update Crollo's followers collection as well with gone. So that would make it even, and when I click here, I would know that my user, the user which I'm signed in with, follows this person, and this person has a follower as me. So that is required in order to implement the follow following functionality perfectly, because then we can see our followers and our following, and that is why, so it's a two-way thing for us in order to make so. Again, coming to that point, that since we would need to make two API calls now, one with our signed in users user ID for updating our following list, and another with the other users user ID which would have the followers, which would add us as a follower of their own. So there would be two API calls with two different user IDs. So what I was thinking is that let's just quickly go inside our main view model, and we would need to make few changes here in order to implement this. So we can write follow following functionality. There are some things that I wanted to talk about before even going about it. So you must have noticed that I'm simply using one view model and putting in all the functions there. This is not really appreciated. I would say that we are making, essentially making the file way too large, and it could cause you issues in order to make changes in the future if you have to implement something else. That keeps on getting bigger and bigger, so it's hard to maintain that way. So what you could do is that you could segregate the view models as per the views, but that is something I wanted to leave it to you. So you could just create your own view models, one specifically for auth, one specifically for the home feed, and then there would be the user section. So you could do something like that. I wasn't really planning on implementing this because this is more of a cleanup and a dev side thing that could help devs get a better understanding of the code. And if you're working in a team or something, then definitely that's something you need to think about. But here we are just building this application for our own personal use, and from a learning perspective, I don't think so it's so much required that, I mean, even if you segregate this whole view model into three other view models, it doesn't change the fact that the functionality remains the same. So that is why I have till now not done that thing. So it's not like I did not notice this, but it was just that I did not want to go that route. So that is there. And also, I apologize for all the background noises in the past few videos. I was really trying to keep the noise to a minimum, but sometimes in the neighborhood there are things going on, so that happens. But like, other than that, I try to keep it to the least possible. Let's just start with our functionality. So we will create a followers array. Basically this would include, it would be of database user, and it would be an empty array. Let's just do this. This is there. We can copy this out and we can add following. So this is for our own user, the user which we are signed in with. This is for that user, and then what we can do is that we can add another published property, and this would maintain the is following functionality. So basically if I'm following or not, we can check from here, so that when we go to someone's else profile, let's suppose here, this text should update rather than we are following them or following not. So this is one thing to take care of. Now what we can do is that we can add another published property, and this one we will call other database user. So similarly, in the last few seconds I was explaining that how we need to make two different API calls with two different users ID. So I was thinking that when we go to someone's else profile, we would actually store this database user inside the other database user to make things easier for us. And also you must be noticing that if we go back here, what is happening is that it fetches the wrong user and shows us this is not at all appreciated, right? Because it looks like a major bug inside the app. I'm really sorry about this noise. Let me just put the bottle aside. So yeah, this is there. So okay, right now it's giving us some error. Obviously we need to make it optional and give it a value of nil. So this is there. Now we can start with adding the following functionality, and then we would make a few changes inside the existing functions as well to make everything work. So first would go down would be simply just fetching users followers data. So we can write private func. Now what we can do is that we can write fetch user followers data, and we can type in user ID, and we can give it a type string. This is there. Then we can write async throws, and this would give out an array of database users. This is fine. We can open the parenthesis. We can select a DB which would be of the type firestore.firestore. This is there. And then what we can do is that we can create a reference, and this reference will basically have try await, and it would be db.collection. This would be users. This would be document with our user ID, and inside of users we would have another collection which we would call followers. So this is there. This is not yet created because our user has not followed anyone, or no one else has followed our user. So that is fine, and it would be solved once we start following people here and there. So let followers equals try. Now what we can do is that we can use the reference, then we can use the documents and map them to our database user, similarly like we did for our other functionalities. We did this once for post, we did this for decoding all the users in the explore page. So this is something we are doing. If you remember that function, fetch all database users, so it is something like that only. And we can do as database user dot self. This is there, and now we can just return followers from here. So this is fine. I think this function should no longer throw us any kind of an error. Okay. Now what we can do is that we can write a public function which would actually make use of this private async function and help us with the functionality. So okay, so I was just going about fetch user followers, and inside of here we can write user ID which would be of the type string. This is there. We can add task, we can add do catch, and inside do statement we would now write let followers equals try await fetch user followers, this one, and what we can do is that we can pass in the user ID that we are getting from here. Now we can open a dispatch queue. So let's just go about opening the dispatch queue dot main dot async, not async after. So let's just remove all this. We can open the closure. Now inside closure we can write self dot followers equals followers, and we can add a print statement which would say successfully fetched user followers. So that is there, and inside the catch statement we can write failed to fetch user followers, and we can add error dot localized description, so to give us some insight like what's happening. Now that we have done fetch user followers data, now we can copy this whole functionality out. We can paste this again. We can name this following, and we can name this one followers. This is there. Fetch user following data. We can copy this out. We can paste this here. Now here we would actually need to reference the following side of things and not followers. Everything else remains the same, and inside of fetch user followers we need to change it to fetch user following. So this is there. Now we are using we can rename this, and we can rename this, and following gets our following. This is there. So I think this functionality is also done. We can write following here as well. I don't think so we need to make any more changes. Fetch user following data, references users with following collection. This was followers collection. We map them into our own struct, we return it, and inside this function we use the task object, call this function, populate our published property with it, and this is fine. Now we need to add one function which would to check if user follows the other user. Basically the thing I was talking about, that if I just go to someone else's profile, how would I know if I follow this person? So we need to make an API call for that, right? And if in the array I can find this person's user ID, I can just simply show here that we can return true, and then it can show followed, yeah, following or following here, and that would work. So yeah, that is what we are going to do. We can write function check if user follows. We can make the u capital here. This is there. We can take in a user ID. Basically this user ID would be of the user whom with we would be checking our own user. So you can do let followers array equals self dot following dot map, and we can get the user ID from them. So user ID, this is there, and we can open a dispatch queue now. Dispatch queue dot main dot async, and inside of async we can do self dot is following value, which we had just added above, and we can check if the followers array, basically not followers array but it should be following array dot contains the user ID. So what are we doing here? Just to make sure, we are checking the published property following, which is updated via this API call. So for us as a user, so suppose I'm signed in as the username gone. What is happening is that for gone we make the API call to fetch all of their followings, and inside followings we might or might not find Crollo. Okay, so suppose we are following that particular user ID with Crollo. What would happen is that it would get stored in here, and since we are mapping it, so we're converting one type to another. So basically following, which is of the type database user, gets converted to just an array with some user IDs. So user ID 1, user ID 2, user ID 3, something like that. So now that this array is only of the type string, we can option click on it and check for ourselves. So what happens is that now we can use this property, and this is this function defined for arrays. Basically it checks inside this array if this particular user ID that we have passed, in our case this user ID would be this person's user ID whose profile we have just opened. So this is some API call we need to make every time we open someone's else profile. So it would be for general user profile view, we would make this API call. So that is there, and it returns either true or false, and we assign that to our is following functionality so that we can know if the person follows the person or not. So yeah, this is there. Now what we can do is that um, we should work now on handle follow. So basically we can work on following functionality first. Following functionality, this is there. Now what we can do is that we can write a private function. We can call this handle follow user. This is there. Then we can add two parameters. One would be the current user, which would be of the type database user, and the other one would be the other user, basically the person we are following here. And this would be of the type database user as well. This is there. Now we can write async throws here, and let's just open parenthesis. Now we will take a reference of firestore class. So firestore dot firestore, this is there. Now we can check for our current user ID. So basically that is what I'm doing here. Current user ID, that would be current user dot ID. And now what we can do is that we can add a comma here. We can create another let, and we can call other user ID, and this would be for the other user dot user ID. So this is there. Now if this doesn't work out, we can just throw an error basically, and we can say ns error, and this error would have some kind of a domain, and this domain would be invalid user ID, and the code should be 0 or something. We don't really need to give it something else. So yeah, this is there. Now what we would do is that we will reference to the following and followers sub collections of the respected users. Basically, just like I told you, now we are handling the follow functionality. So what happens is that there would be one API call from our end to add that particular user in our users following sub collection, and then there would be a particular API call from that user's end which would to add us in their following collection, in their followers collection, I mean. So yeah, that is what we are doing. So let's take a reference. Let following reference, this would have db.collection, this would reference users, then it would access a document with our current user ID basically, and then we can have collection, and this collection would be following, and now we can get a document, and this document should be other user ID. So basically we are referencing if this document already exists or not. So similarly we will do let followers reference, we can do db.collection, then we can have users here. Now we can get document, and inside document we would have the other user ID. Inside the collection we would go to followers, and inside followers we will fetch another document, and this document with our current user ID. So the first step is referencing our own user referencing the person being followed. So yeah, this is there. We can press and enter here. So this is there. Now we move ahead. What we do is that we need to encode them into dictionaries, because right now our database user is our own custom type which is not understood by Firebase. So we can create a dictionary out of here. So we could have current user data, and we could do try firestore dot encode. This is something similar we did a while back. If I can just search this up, we might get it somewhere else. And this was to add post to the user, because we need to encode the post in order for it to upload. So that is what we are doing here. And this encoder dot encode is there, and it should have the current user basically. And similarly, what we would do is that we can have other user data, and inside of here we would actually add other user. So that is what we are doing here. Now what we would do is that we will add the other user to the current users following sub collection. So yep, let's go about doing that. Try await, and we would need to use the following reference, and the spelling is a bit wrong, I would say. It should be following reference, and it should be followers reference. So yeah, this is there. So following reference will actually use set data, and it would use other user data here. And similarly, we would add the current user to the other users followers sub collection. So yeah, this is there. Now we will do again a try await. We would add followers reference dot set data, and this would have the current user data basically. So yeah, this is there. Now what we need to do is that, let's just think about that. Now that if we have written the private function, we can just wrap this up inside a public function, which would be func handle follow, and this would obviously take in again two parameters. So let's just copy it from here, and this would internally call our private function, which is our asynchronous function. So that is what we are going to do here. Task, then we have a do and a catch block. Now inside the do block we would do try await, and we would have handle follow user, and then we can just pass in our current user and the other user as other user. So this seems all fine. Now what we can do is that we can call this functionality check if user follows, and for the user ID we would add current user dot user ID question mark this. So basically the moment we are making this API call, the moment it finishes, we are also checking if this has been updated. So our is following published property is also updated, so that we could show up in the view right after we click on follow on someone else's profile. So that is what we are trying for here. Now inside a print statement, what we can do is that successfully followed the user, and inside our catch statement we can write failed to follow the user, and we can add a description here, error dot localize description. So that is fine. So we have successfully handled following functionality. Now what we can do is that we need to go inside our fetch user data basically. So let's just go inside fetch, let's do command F here, fetch user data. We are not really getting this because I wrote the wrong spelling. So fetch user data is here. Now this time we would actually take in a boolean value now. So is current user, which would be of the type bool. What I'm going to do here is that instead of just creating another function, we can check that if is current user is true, we can use self.database user and add this. Else what we can do is that we can use our self.other database user and add this here. So how would we actually use this functionality? I mean, so in order to use this, you would know that if I just try to run the app, it should throw me error at both the places I'm calling this function, and it would be the user profile view as well as the general user profile view. Here it's asking me, and it says if it's a current user, but you know general user profile view is to show other people's profile. So this is false in our case. So if we turn this thing as false, what happens is that it goes to the else block and other database user is being used now. So let's just go quickly inside here as well and check if um, we need to use this, and we need to, okay, it gets a database user, so that is fine. Do we need to, I think here we are passing in a database user, so we don't really need to make an API call to fetch anything. So okay, I don't really think so that we need to make any API call here to fetch that user something. What we can do is that we can comment this functionality out and try running the app and see for ourselves if it is causing any kinds of issues. So okay, it says missing current this, let's just add, let's just call it true. I guess it's not required for here, but then when we make our API call for follower following, we would need that. So it would be better for us to keep that there. And let's just quickly check this out. So yeah, I understood the fact that we don't really need these API calls in order to show someone else. Like suppose this would work fine because it is fetching Crollo's things, but then it's not updating because fetch user post is not being called, so it is showing me our own users post, so that is there. But this would be needed when we handle the follow following functionality, so let's just keep it there. So this is there. Now that we have done this much, let's just go back inside our main view model. Now we can fold this function fetch user data. We can just go up. This is our handle follow user, and this is our handle follow functionality. Now we can do, now that we have added following functionality, we also need to do one more thing, which is unfollowing functionality. So we could write unfollowing functionality. For this purpose, let's just copy paste the entire two functions here, and we say handle unfollow user, this is there, and handle unfollow, this is there. Now what we can call is that we can call handle unfollow user, and okay, this seems fine. And let's see what all changes that we need to make, because it obviously won't be like the same thing that we just did. So basically we can go about saying we need a user ID and the other user ID, and what we can do is that we can fetch that user from there. And now let me just think, do we even need the whole user, or we just need, do we even need the whole user, or we just need user ID of the type string, and we need other user ID, which would also be of the type string. So this is there. Now this would be async throws. Obviously we reference, we can do reference to current users following sub collection. Yep, we need that. So we can just remove this from here for now. And then we don't need this. So we go inside the following reference, we go db users, and then inside document we would have the user ID. This is fine. Inside collection we go to following. In the document we would have other user ID. This is fine. Then what we do is that we delete the document basically, and from the following sub collection, so that we don't really need to, we don't need to um we do no longer need that person in our following lists, following sub collection, because they have been unfollowed. So that is there. So that is a simple API call. We do a try await, and we do following following reference dot delete basically. So this is there. We can just remove this whole thing from here. We don't really need this. So this is one thing. Let's just make it better. So actually I'm just figuring this out, that we don't really need the whole functionality in one function. So basically we can call this remove from following. So this is what this function does. It removes the user taking its reference from the following. So yeah, now we need to write another function. So we can copy this out, and we can call this remove from followers. So basically when we unfollow someone, that person is removed from our following sub collection, and similarly for that person we are removed from their follower sub collection. So that is what is going to go here. So basically there's the user ID, and then there's the follower ID basically. Let's be a bit more descriptive. So we can reference to the user being unfollowed and their followers sub collection we should do. Yep, that makes sense. Basically we reference to the user being unfollowed and their followers sub collection. So we can have followers reference, and we can go inside db users, document would be user ID, and the collection would be followers, and this should be the follower ID basically. And what we do here is now is that we delete the document obviously from the followers sub collection. So this should be followers, this should be followers, and this is deleted. So yeah, this is how we go about handling the remove from followers. Now what we do is that we combine both these functions inside a single function, which we call handle and follow. So this would obviously require the current user and the database user. Let's just remove the task closure because we don't really need it. Now we can open our own task closure. It would be a bit different from the last one. So do catch should obviously be there. Then what we do is that we remove the other user from current users following sub collection. I'm just trying to be very descriptive through my comment, so that later on when I come back to my own code I can understand that what kind of logic I was trying to make here. So we do remove from following, and in the user ID we would pass current user dot user ID, and we can pass in an empty string if that is nil, and for the other user we will pass in other user dot user id, and again an empty string if that's not required. And then what we can do is that we can remove the current user from other users followers sub collection. So this should be there, sub collection from, oops, the spelling of from is wrong. Remove the current user from other users follow sub collection, makes sense. Try await remove from followers, and for the user id again it would be the other users user id, and for the follower id it would be our current users follower id, basically user id. I hope this makes sense. I mean, it's a bit confusing at first, but if you just look at it, there only a sub collection for our user and the other person's sub collection would be there. So that is what we are doing. And if you notice this function remove from followers, what we are doing is that we are referencing the other person's user ID collection, and then we are removing ourselves. So that is why the follower ID would be us and the user ID would be them. So that is what is going down here, and what we can do is that we can print that we have successfully unfollowed. So yeah, this is there. Now what we can do is that we can run our check if user follows, so that we can update the is follow property, and we can pass in current user dot user id, and it can be null. So remove this, remove the gap between the statements, and inside our catch statement what we can do is we can get a print statement. Inside the print statement we would have failed to unfollow, and yeah, that's about it. So we have successfully, I'm sorry about that, we have successfully written the functions for handling follow as well as handling unfollow, and we have made that small little change in our fetch user data so that we can store the other users data separately in another publish var, so that we can use it for this whole follow following functionality. So yeah, this is there. I'm just going through the code once so I can see that if I'm not missing out on something. So we have the handle follow user and handle follow, then we have two more private functions, and we could actually have clubbed them together. It doesn't really matter, but then it's more descriptive this way, so we can have it like that. And there's the handle and follow, this is all fine. And then we have fetch database user, which now fetch database user is a simple function get request, so that is fine. This all looks good to me. Let's just remove some extra spaces. So let me just think if there's something else that we need to do. We created the follower functionality, we created the unfollow functionality, we made a change inside our fetch user uh, data, fetch user data, so that is fine. Now what we can do is just we can try running the app once to see that if anything is broken by chance, but I don't really think so that would happen because we have not made any such major change in with the existing views, so that should be fine. So let me just see to it once. And other than that I feel like okay, so we have our own user, their posts and everything. We go to explore, we see other people, this person does not have anything, we have this other person, their posts are coming. This all looks good to me for now. So what we can do now is that we can just implement this functionality with the UI part of things, because right now this button does not do anything. So that is what we need to do here in the next video. And also we can take up the connections page or something. We can create a generic view to show either your followers or your following. So that would be a fun task to do. And you must have noticed in the explore page, if we go to some other person, we don't see any of their followers or following, so things become a bit easier for us. But it's up to you if you really want to add that functionality that we can see other people's following as well. So I would suggest that you can take this task up as a challenge and you could work your way out, and I feel like you would be able to do so as well. So anyways, if you have any doubts, you can just leave them down in the comments. I would be really happy to help. I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you.